Hello and welcome to another Versus debate. I'm Jonathan Friedland, and tonight we're debating the future of the monarchy. A warm welcome to all of you here in London and around the world watching online. This is the 6th event in our new series of Google Plus Versus debates organised by Intelligence Squared. And tonight the motion before us is the royal baby should never be crowned. The royal wedding and the Diamond Jubilee saw the monarchy's popularity surge last year, and at the heart of the royalist revival, Prince William and the so-called commoner-turned-princess, Kate Middleton. But as the country awaits the birth of their child, the third in line to the throne, the question is whether our attachment to the royals really squares with the values we hold dear of equality or fairness. And does the next royal baby deserve the chance, perhaps, of a more normal life? Now, to debate these issues tonight, we have four very esteemed speakers, either here at the Sadler's Wells Theatre in London, or joining us online via the Google Plus Hangout. Wherever you are, you'll get the chance to put your questions to those four speakers. But let me tell you something about who they are. For the motion, you have Joan Smith and Professor Stephen Hazler, and against the motion, Jenny Bond and Rosie Boycott. And you will be able to put your thoughts and questions to all of them. And for those of you watching online, we have Hannah Black on the Hangout, who will be monitoring your questions and putting them to the panel on your behalf. And remember, you can post your comments on the Google Plus Versus page, or you can comment using the hashtag Versus, VS Royal. That's hashtag Versus Royal, VS Royal. And your vote is crucial because, as with all Intelligence Squared debates, we've already asked you to vote either in the hall or online. And the pre-vote results as you came in this evening, and remember, this is not binding, this is just a test of the temperature before we fully debate. So here's how you voted before you'd heard any of the conflicting arguments. Voting for, in other words, believing that this royal baby should never be crowned, was a whopping 55%. So a clear majority believed the royal baby should never be crowned initially. And then against that motion, who are supportive of the crowning of this baby, 21%. And with a very large, 1 in 4, 24% who say they don't know at this stage. And it's those don't knows that I suggest our speakers here will be competing for, trying to win them over, and also, of course, trying to pull people away from those two sides. And perhaps, Jenny Bond, you'll be trying to chip away at that 55% figure.
Got my work cut out, eh?
You've got your work cut out, absolutely you do. But those votes, so there's lots to play for. And at the end of the debate, once you've had a chance to hear both sides of the argument, to put your own questions and thoughts yourself, of course, we'll be asking you to vote again. So, without further ado, let me introduce our first speaker for the motion that this royal baby should never be crowned, Joan Smith. And perhaps, Joan Smith, you'll take your place at the lectern while I tell you that Joan Smith is a renowned author and human rights campaigner and a leading activist for an elected head of state. And Joan Smith, you have 6 minutes. After 5 minutes, rather impolitely, I'll ping my glass. But Joan Smith, let's hear the case for the motion from you.
Good evening. When it comes to the monarchy, it's hard to imagine a more supine bunch than the UK media. But just occasionally, something goes wrong and the truth slips through. It happened a couple of days ago when the Daily Mail's online site gave top billing to a wedding attended by Prince William and Prince Harry. There was all the usual gush about hats and dresses, but the point apparently was that some of the female guests had been linked to the princes, which may just mean they spoke to them a couple of times in the past. Anyway, the site provided handy biographical summaries of the women, and suddenly we got this little gem. One of Harry's acquaintances was too serious and clever to become a princess. It's rare to see an admission that you have to be a bit dim to marry into the royal family, and I doubt whether it's what Kate Middleton, who's currently fully occupied with the extraordinary achievement of having a baby, wants to hear. But the royal family exists in a protective bubble which most British journalists refuse to dent. The Queen has been on the throne longer than most of us have been alive, and her survival is a tribute to the power of the status quo. As Tom Paine observed, a long habit of not thinking a thing wrong gives it a superficial appearance of being right. The monarchy isn't right for more reasons than I have time to elaborate tonight, but for most people it's just there. And the main reason for that is an astonishing failure of scrutiny which has allowed all sorts of myths to flourish. We live in a country which enshrines equality at the heart of its laws and values. We have acts of parliament and treaties which insist that we're all born equal and have equal rights. Kate Middleton's baby is entitled to those rights just as the rest of us are, but no more than that. The idea that one child out of the hundreds of thousands born in this country each year is uniquely suited by birth to become head of state and keep the job for the rest of his or her life is a nonsense. What if she doesn't want it or feel qualified for it? How can the members of a single family possibly represent the values, diversity, and talent of a 21st century democracy? They can't, as I'm able to tell you after enduring the suffocating formality of parties at Buckingham Palace and Holyrood House. One of the first things that struck me is how nervous people are around the Queen, as though they might say or do the wrong thing. I did. I said hello to her before she spoke to me, and this breach of protocol was apparently so egregious that she cut me dead. I've heard similar stories from other people who've approached her in the same spirit, which is to say with common politeness and an assumption of equality. I didn't choose the Queen to represent me in my country. I can't imagine any election in which I'd vote for a member of the Windsor family unless it was selecting someone for eviction from the big royal house. But the Queen did choose. She agreed to become head of state, and she should have the good manners to acknowledge all its citizens, including those of us who disagree with hereditary privilege. In a moment or two, we're going to hear from the other side, the defenders of this ludicrous, embarrassing, and Ruritanian system. Usually they talk about the Queen's popularity, the way she represents continuity, and the fact that she's supposedly above politics. Whether she would be so popular if we knew more about her, in the way we know about people who go to the bother of running for office, is another matter. I'd love to see Prince Charles sweating on the election trail, trying to explain why he's fit to represent the country and answering awkward questions. I'm thinking of things like the real cost of the monarchy, which we are told is £38 million, but that doesn't include the cost of round-the-clock security provided by the police and the army. I'd love to be able to tell you what it actually costs. The campaigning organisation Republic estimates it at more than £200 million, but I can't because the royal family is exempt from freedom of information requests. If Republic's figure is right, that's the cost of almost 10,000 nurses and 8,200 police officers. It's 112 times as expensive as the Irish presidency and makes Britain's royal family the most expensive in Europe. You won't hear about this in the Daily Mail or from most broadcasters. They employ people known as royal correspondents who do a job unique among British journalists. A defence correspondent doesn't tell you what lovely uniforms the generals are wearing, and an industrial correspondent isn't expected to be polite to the trade unions. Not so the people who cover the royals, who might talk about a royal divorce, the kind of stuff which habitually fills celebrity magazines, but wouldn't dream of questioning the existence of the institution. They'll tell you the royals are good for tourism, a claim for which there's no evidence whatsoever. Windsor Legoland is actually a bigger draw than Windsor Castle. They'll also tell you that the royals are above politics, something I know to be untrue from personal experience. I was present when the Queen was introduced to a Turkish guest at a Christmas party at Buckingham Palace. Someone mentioned Turkey's EU application, and the Queen responded without hesitation, "Oh no, we don't want Turkey coming in for a long time." Then there are the astonishing reasons given by the Attorney General, Dominic Grieve, when he refused a freedom of information request by The Guardian, which wanted to see a sample of the numerous letters Prince Charles writes to government ministers. Grieve said publication of the particularly frank letters would seriously damage Charles's ability to perform his duties when he becomes king. He said members of the public might come to believe that Charles disagreed with the policies of the last Labour government and was not politically neutral. Charles isn't politically neutral, and the government knows it, but they don't want us to see the evidence. So what do we have here? What is this baby being born into? A secretive, hugely expensive, politically interfering, undemocratic institution which isn't fit for purpose. I trust myself to vote for a government which take life or death decisions. I also trust myself to vote for someone who's actually able to represent this country, someone who isn't necessarily white, upper middle class, straight, and named after a castle. I look at people who've carried out the role around the world, and I'm sure this country could do better. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks very much. Thank you to Joan Smith. Please do stay at the lectern so you can now field a challenge to those arguments. From the Google Hangout, where waiting for us is a prominent journalist and feminist, the first female editor of 2 national newspapers. In 2002, she campaigned for Diana, Princess of Wales, to be voted the greatest Briton in a programme for the BBC. She is Rosie Boycott. And Rosie, you can hear us and we can see you, and you've heard the arguments presented from Joan Smith, who said the monarchy is ludicrous, embarrassing and Ruritanian. What's your response?
Well, my response is that I'm always very uncertain as to what we would get in its place. There were times when people said maybe Richard Branson would be an excellent head of state, but actually I think that would be pretty unbearable. I think there are very few Mary Robinsons and Mary McAleese around in the world. And if I thought that's what we could get, then I would be very happy about moving more towards Joan's camp. I think Joan's argument is excellent. I agree with an awful lot of it. What worries me mostly about the royal family is the perpetuation of the class system. Can you hear me?
Loud and clear. It's very, very...
Okay, sorry, it's just... It's reverberating on me, so I'm sorry. What I cannot imagine is actually coming to the end of it and having this election. It would mean we were electing our MPs, we were electing prime ministers, we were electing political parties, and then on top of that, we are electing an individual. Is that individual meant to be politically unbiased? Which is an extremely difficult thing to have. I mean, I agree with Joan entirely about the Charles's interference. It seems to me that the monarchy has had a really good run with the Queen, and that she has managed to remain fairly impartial. Even in Pete Morgan's play, The Audience, her interventions are jovial rather than political. And I think we have done quite well. I feel extremely worried about the next generation. I think the fact that The Guardian cannot get hold of Charles's letters is really dreadful, actually, and I hope that Jonathan Freeland and The Guardian will go on pitching in that freedom of information request, as I think we all have a right to know. As Joan has made the point, we spent a lot of money on this lot, and we need to know what they're doing. And it is a very odd thing that you have an unelected head of state who apparently can influence the cabinet and the prime minister. Yes. That said, why is the new head of state going to be any different?
Let's put that directly then to Joan Smith, this idea that yes, maybe you've made some good powerful arguments, but what on earth do you replace it with? And the Mary Robinsons of this world don't grow on trees, very few of them, and it will be just yet another elected politician.
I find it very hard to believe we couldn't find somebody who'd do the job better than Prince Charles. That's my first point. The other point I would make is that this would be time limited. And if people elected somebody who turned out to be completely useless at the job, that would only last for 4 or 5 years. And then the next time round, people would think more carefully about it. And I think there are many people around the world who've fulfilled political office. Some of them have done it very well, some of them haven't. But at least we have a choice. I have been on this earth all my life and never had a choice about who the head of state is. And it just seems to me a very simple demand. I want to vote about who represents me.
Why do we need a head of state?
We need a head of state because There are occasions when something happens, when people need to speak for the country. If there's a terrorist attack, sometimes events like the Olympics, we need a head of state who actually goes to those and represents the country and represents its values. And one of my arguments is that this family, which is there by birth, because their parents and grandparents were there, can't possibly represent a country which is as diverse as ours and egalitarian.
Let me just hear some more from Rosie Boycott on this point, which a lot of people who might otherwise be persuaded by what Joan Smith has said do bring up, and that is this notion of continuity, that actually the fact that it has been the same person through perhaps the lifetimes of almost everybody here in this room, not everyone, but a lot of the people in this room, that's actually perhaps more of an asset that we discard at our peril, that it's something to be valued.
Yeah.
What do you think on that?
Yeah, no, I do actually think that is something to be valued, and I think that in, out, inevitably ends up with some becoming quite political, swinging things one direction or another, and there is something to be said for it, and I don't think that it has been a bad thing. As I say, my concern is much more for the future, and the sense that Charles is a much more interfering and meddling person, and I think is actually more out of touch than she is. And I agree with you about the flashes, the tackler princes. It's worrying.
And you've made some points about Charles, but the argument before us tonight is about this royal baby never being crowned. So, in a way, putting Charles out of the argument, and if you've made a case about the Queen, and there's this, it's an unknown quantity in every way, this future heir to the throne. Just in principle, putting your worries about Prince Charles to one side, your view on whether this baby should indeed be a future monarch?
No, I think that we will probably not have a monarchy by then, somehow.
Right, so, and do you have an answer to your own argument that you made earlier, that you can't quite see the process by which we get to that point?
No, I don't quite see the process, but at the same time, I find it hard to know that it will just, to imagine that it will just continue. I think that Charles may be the thing that starts to change it. I think a lot of people may not feel as affectionate towards him as they feel towards the Queen. Now, I don't think of myself as a monarchist in any way, but I feel quite warm towards the Queen. I think that she's done a great job. I think she's good for this country. She's carried on in a very, very straightforward way, all the way through all the ups and downs, this and that. But I feel he is much more swept by the tide of events,
yes.
And he may not be the brightest thing on the block, and he probably wouldn't get elected. And the fact is, he interferes. At least the Queen has had the sense to keep her nose out of politics. And we could be stuck with someone who causes our elected politicians a lot of problems. And I feel if that conflict happens, something else may happen.
Thank you, Rosie Boycott, thank you. We'll be coming back to you and hearing more from you, but for both of you, for that exchange, Rosie Boycott, Joan Smith, thank you. Joan Smith will return to the table here. Thank you. And so an interesting insight there from someone who's not an avowed monarchist, nevertheless worried about what would come next and feeling a deep sense of warmth for the Queen. And that perhaps says something about what Republicans are up against in making their argument. Let's move on. And here our first speaker, or speaker here anyway, against the motion. And it is a person who, when it comes to matters regal, her name is almost synonymous with the royal family. She's one of Britain's most famous television faces. As the BBC's royal correspondent for some 14 years, covered many of the royal family's major events and dramas. Please welcome Jenny Bond. And Jenny also will have 6 minutes. A little ping of the glass will come from me when she's had 5. But off you go, Jenny Bond.
Okay, well, good evening, everyone. Briefly rebutting some of those points, I never, ever, Joan, described what the Queen was wearing. I was not interested in what colour her hat or clothes were. It was television, you could see it for yourself, and it was irrelevant anyway. I was not always polite about the royal family. The palace always felt I had a great sting in the tail of my reports, and they disliked me. And I did frequently question the point of the monarchy and the future of the monarchy. 6 minutes, 6 facts. First of all, I would like to say, actually, I'm not a raving monarchist, but I am unpersuaded that it is the democratic will of the British people to unseat the sovereign and to replace 1,000 years of monarchy with a presidential system. I'm simply unconvinced that that is the will of the majority of the British people. Republicans speak a great deal about the undemocratic nature of hereditary monarchy, and it is a pure accident of birth, obviously, and we've had some very peculiar heads of state, very peculiar kings and queens, some rather boring, some inspirational, some libidinous, and some quite quirky. Over the years and during those tumultuous Diana years in which I was reporting for the BBC, there's been plenty of ammunition for the Republican cause. I mean, they've handed it to the Republicans on a plate, really, all these evidence. And yet, opinion polls consistently show that the support for the Republicans sticks at around 20%, if they're lucky. And last year, as we saw at the beginning of this debate, last year with the Diamond Jubilee, support for the monarchy was at a massive 80%. Even amongst young people, 73% who were questioned favoured the current system. Now that is a level of support that any politician, any president would give his right arm for. So I think at the moment a referendum would clearly show a majority in favour of keeping the monarchy. So that's fact number one. This is a fantastically popular institution. Fact two, I think they're pretty good value for money. Yes, it costs a fair old whack. We have all sorts of figures banded around. You can do what you want with statistics. Probably around £34 million a year at the moment. This under the sovereign grant. It's a new system. But they have steadily been cutting costs over the years. I've been along to the palace many times, and they have opened their books to us and shown exactly what they spend on flowers, on cutlery, on everything. The minutiae of it, they've been squeezing it down. Yes, the Duke of York could be a lot cleverer. He could stop going around in private jets. How stupid can you be? I agree on that. But do you really think a president will cost any less? You really do? Well, a recent book suggested that the Obamas cost $1.4 billion a year. 13 years ago, which is the latest figure I get, on the Air Force One, it cost $56,000 an hour to fly it. Do you really think that security for a president will cost any less than it does for the royal family? It's a two-way road. The monarchy is a huge attraction around the world. I accept that the tourists would still come to the UK without the monarchy, but there's no doubt that they do remain a massive draw. If you go down to the palace, ask the tourists, are they gazing through the gates to look at a museum? No, they're here to see the Queen, of course they are. The monarchy is a huge asset to the British brand. They really do fly the flag for us, and there's that recognition which is instant with the Queen. I mean, can you tell me who's the president of Ireland? Anyone know? No? Okay. Michael Higgins. Italy? Anyone know the president of Italy? No. Giorgio Napolitano. Yeah, well, I could go on. Germany? Anyone got Germany as president? No. Okay. There you go. The Queen is recognised throughout the world. I travel with her a lot. I've seen the delegations she takes, the business that follows, the smiling faces that follow her, actually. People envy our monarchy. Fact three, as a nation, we are apathetic about elections. Who bothers to go to even a general election when we are talking about real power? Very few, well, about 60% generally at a general election turnout, 60%. Local elections, you know it's pathetic, 30, 40%. Who's going to go and vote for a president? Who's going to bother? I guarantee young people won't. Fact four, the monarchy and the monarch is, as you said, meant to be quite separate from party politics, and the Queen absolutely is apart from party politics in a way that would be very, very difficult for any public figure to do. Impartiality, I think, is very valuable. And I don't think you can overstate the importance of the continuity and stability that the Queen has brought. For prime ministers who go and see her every week in confidence, that is a very valuable time to unburden themselves to the Queen. And Tony Blair said, quite famously, there are only two women I can tell everything to. One's the wife and the other's the Queen. That's important. And if you have a presidential system with someone chopping and changing all the time, you're going to lose that continuity. You're going to lose that stability. Fact 5. You may think of the monarchy as a stuffy old institution, and in many ways, I agree, it is. But it's evolving. It's evolving slowly. It's now, for what it's worth, on Facebook, on Twitter, on Flickr. There's much more access for journalists to go inside the palace to talk to people. They're bringing people in from outside, from industry, and from outside just the courtiers, the strict courtiers. It's moving with the times and evolving, and that is a very important part of why I think it is so successful. They're connecting with young people. William and Catherine are cool, and young people love them. They really do. You ask any young people, they're all over okay. They are celebrities now. And I don't think a president and his family would have the same connection with young people. Final fact 6. The royal family are loved and valued by a good many people in this country. Deal with it. You know, it's very disrespectful, I think, to belittle the feelings of so many people, to scorn their attachment to an ancient institution. There's much to be said for loving your country, much to be said for loving the head of state who represents us very well around the world. So I say bring on the referendum. Let's see what the British people decide. I think they will decide we should keep the monarchy, and in the future, hopefully, if we have sovereigns as good as the Queen, they will say crown the new royal baby.
Thank you very much, Jenny Bond. Stay where you are. Thank you. My memory may be wrong about this. I'm sure there was a survey some time ago where people were asked to identify a photograph of you and a photograph of the Queen, and many people did in fact select you as the...
that, my dear, is total bollocks, I have to say.
Her Majesty. So thank you for that.
He's also much, much older than me, so you can take that one right back.
People thought you were a member of the royal family. I think that was my point.
And that's also silly.
Yeah. Now, thank you. Challenging you from the Google Hangout is the director of London's Global Policy Institute, the former chairman of the anti-monarchy campaign group Republic, and the author of numerous books, including The End of the House of Windsor. His name is Professor Stephen Hazler. And Stephen, your task is to challenge Jenny Bond, perhaps make some remarks of your own over the coming 6 minutes, and Jenny is going to stay and perhaps field some of those challenges. So off you go, Stephen Hazler.
Well, Jenny, another tour de force by you. Very good performance in my view, and you made some powerful arguments. However, I think there's bound to be a however. I think there's one question that I'd like to hear you answer when you come to reply to me. And that is, why do you believe that every other child or baby born at the same time as the royal baby is born should be excluded from becoming head of state? Indeed, why should everybody in this country who is not a member of the House of Windsor and not linked to the family and not the eldest son, why should they be excluded from representing our country? What have you got against the British people? Why are we not allowed, all of us, to consider when we're born, as did President Obama, that a man of Obama's background could become President of the United States? Couldn't do that in this country. And what a pity it would have been if, because of a monarchical system, we couldn't have had a President Obama, we couldn't have had a President Mandela. Mr. Mandela would have been excluded from becoming head of South Africa and representing his country if he wasn't a royal. So I think the royalists have got to answer this central question when they come to reply as to why they exclude every British person from even aspiring to become head of state. The other question, I think,
Stephen, just before you go on to your let's hear Jenny Bond respond to that, because you put a sharp question. Jenny Bond, Stephen Hazler asked, why should every other baby born the same day as this.
Well, I mean, it's a
coming
terribly
royal
simple answer. This is the system we've got. It's the system we've got. If you want to change it, win your argument, get a referendum, win over the British people. You haven't done so far. So far, you've failed to do so.
Well, that's the argument I'm making, that the system is ridiculous. This is exactly the argument.
But why don't you get more support for your Republican movement then?
Resources, my dear.
No, it's no good taking the view here that we haven't yet won the argument. We're making an argument here, and I'd like you to respond to it.
But my dear, you've been making it for years and years and years. We've argued for at least 20 years, and you still have 20%.
All right, Stephen, just hold on a second, because I want to let Jenny Bond come in on this. But you're quite right on the facts of it. The Republican position is unpopular in the country. Hold on, it only enjoys minority support in the country, I think a third or something. But just on the in principle point he makes, in principle, why is it the case that everybody else is ineligible, if you like, from birth for being head of state?
I mean, there isn't any other. It's such a simple answer. This is the system we've got. I'm quite okay. If you want to have a republic, that's fine with me. Let's have presidential elections. We don't have that system at the moment.
Okay.
So Stephen, your question's been answered. Why don't you go on to your next point?
Well, it's a simple repetition, but this is the crucial point. And it comes on to another point, that when the monarchists argue, as they do constantly, we don't want a politician to be president, and who would be president, this shows a remarkable lack of faith in the British people. There's nobody, as Joan Smith argued, according to them, there's no one in the country who could possibly do this job. And the job is, by the way, not as taxing as many people would argue it is. So I think this is a major problem we need to address. Why do we exclude people? Well, of course we're excluded because we're subjects and not citizens. And it's part of our argument that we should become citizens.
Stephen, can I just come in with, I want to hear your reply to one of the a very sort of sharp point that Jenny Bond made, in the sense of she did silence the room. She asked people to name the presidents of countries that are republics, Ireland, Italy and Germany, and truthfully there was not a person in the voice in the room who knew the answer, I think, to any one of those three questions. And does that not make isn't that not a pretty telling state of affairs?
Well, they would have known if she had said the President of the United States or the former President of South Africa. She happened to pick country. We don't know anything about foreign countries anyway in this country. Let's be clear about it. I mean, let's ask people to name the Chancellor of Germany. We will be a bit stretched because the British media does not cover them. You see, Jenny...
But we're talking about non-executive presidents.
Now, let me finish this argument. Jenny comes from a group of people, the British media, who have slathered over these folks for year after year after year.
That's rubbish.
Have a vested interest in keeping them, because the British media is absolutely determined to maintain its sales through celebrity and celebrity-itis. So when I put a very basic democratic point to her, why could she tell me why she's excluding the British people, we don't get an answer, except the only answer we get is that have a referendum. Well, let's have a referendum and let's discuss it.
Okay. Stephen, that's going to be your last point for now, because time is moving on, but we're going to come back to you. Jenny Bond, thank you very much for that. If you return to your seat. Very good. So we're now going to open the debate up when the voices from the panel that we've heard here and from the Google Hangout can be joined by our audience right here in Sadler's Wells and also online. I'll be doing my best to keep a grip on proceedings and timings, and we do have ushers here in the hall who will take questions from you and bring a microphone to you. But if you're online, make sure you post your questions onto the Versus Google Plus page, and you can use that hashtag. Remember, VS Royal is the hashtag. And we have Hannah Black, our web host, who will put questions that are posted there on the Google Plus page to the panel on your behalf. So to start with, let's take some questions that are here, and there's immediately lots of hands going up, which is great. And let's begin with the gentleman here. We're going to get a microphone to you. We've gone to the person there, but that's okay. Gentleman in the blue shirt, and then we'll bring it, and then we'll come to you next. Yes.
Thank you very much. I agree with what Professor Stephen has just said. I mean, we should have a proper, full debate, and I think when Jenny Bond talks about there's only 20% support for a republic, it's probably because people are voting emotionally and not thinking it through. It doesn't stand up to any intellectual scrutiny whatsoever that we have a royal family. It just doesn't make any sense. So we have a proper debate, a debate that is well informed and is out there so everybody can actually have a vote and look at the arguments. I think that would help.
I'm perfectly happy with that.
Can I come in?
Well, James Smith.
Yeah. If I was to declare that I was going to set up a festival of republicanism, which was going to last for 2 days and was going to involve a flotilla of boats going down the Thames and people invited from all over the country to come, and I said to the government, and I'd like you to give me the same resources that you put into the Jubilee so that we, the Republicans, can make our side of the argument, I think things might be a little different. What we've had for 20 or 30 years is uncritical and slavish reporting. I watched TV news, and I see people reporting the fact that Kate Middleton has gone somewhere, that Kate Middleton has walked along a street. Nobody says, and what is the cost of this institution and why is Kate Middleton doing this? Our argument simply does not get the resources, and I think, frankly, the other side would get a hell of a shock if we had the proper kind of public debate where both sides are resourced.
Okay, let's hear from you in the front row. Thank you.
Do you think an elected head of state would have as much time to champion the British cause internationally and the cause of charities within the UK, or do you think that they'll be spending their time wrapped up in party politics?
Okay, why don't we put that to you, Stephen Haysler? If we had an elected head of state, they'd be politicking, and they wouldn't be able to devote themselves in the kind of wholehearted way that the Queen has to being our representative, our figurehead around the world.
Well, it depends who your head of state is. I mean, just imagine Charles as our head of state, or the Duke of Edinburgh as our head of state. Can you imagine the reaction they would have around the world? Now, the problem I think we've had is the Queen, who I readily concede is still quite popular in this country. Nonetheless, and here's a central criticism of the institution and of her, has represented this country still as an imperial monarchy. It's not really allowed us to think and understand our real position in the world. So I'm not persuaded that the monarchy is good for our international reputation. I never have been. And by the way, one other thing, Jonathan, very quickly.
Yeah.
When they say lots of people around the world love our monarchy and would like it, I think they like to gawp at it. I think they like a little medieval theme park that can give them a nice tourist attraction rather than actually want it on their own shores.
Okay, Rosie Boycott, you've heard that argument. What do you think about this point about any future head of state would actually be politicking? That was the question that was asked, and wouldn't be able to devote themselves to this. And then Stephen Haysler says actually when she's popular abroad it's because people like to have a good old gawp at this kind of medieval relic. I paraphrase, but that was broadly his argument.
That's fair enough.
Well, he may be right. He may well be right about that. But I think that's the point about what we might get if we have an elected head of state. Will they be political? I mean, our worry, or my worry, about what's coming next, i.e. Charles, is that he will be desperately political and he will get in the way and interfere with people, and a head of state actually should glide above it and be benign. Yeah. And there are very few Mandelas. I agree, we would love a Mandela, but there are very few of them. And it may run into a whole lot of problems, and I think Jenny's point of saying it's also going to cost us a lot of money.
Very good, thank you. I'm going to take a group of questions now. I'm going to begin with you, and then I want to go to the Google Plus Hangout. But let's start with you, because you've been waiting very patiently.
Okay, to Miss Bond, do you not think that in such an ethnically diverse country, such as our own, a white upper-class monarchy doesn't really represent the population adequately?
Okay, so thank you very much. Do you want to give just a brief answer to that, and then we'll go online?
Well, I mean, there's no reason to think that this royal baby of the future about whom we're talking will not marry someone of a different colour.
I thought you were going to say the baby might be black.
That would be a story. Let's go to Hannah Black, who's there in the Google Plus Hangout, our web host.
Hi, Jonathan. Sorry, just recovering from that last point.
Yes, I'm hoping Twitter's right across it. Go on, Hannah, what have you got?
that actually hasn't come up so much online, but it has been, the atmosphere on Google Plus has been surprisingly supportive of the Queen. People feel she's done a really good job. Maybe they're not so confident about what might happen in the future with Charles and so on. But just a couple of questions from Google Plus for the panel. From Mark Osborne, he makes the point, whichever way you see it, the millions spent on the royals is not that much compared to government waste. He thinks we get a good economic return on the royals and we should keep the institution, and it's government and government waste that we should look at reforming. And just another question from Google Plus from Rob Mackenzie. He says we should be proud of our heritage, but maybe it's time to move on from the royal family. We plough so much money into them, and what kind of message does this send to the millions in poverty who are struggling on low wages or on benefits and so on? So there's two questions from opposite sides of the argument there.
Thank you very much. We'll come back to you as the evening goes on. Let's just hoover up a whole lot of these if we can. Where's the microphone at the moment? Who's got it? Let's pass it along the line to the young man here who's been waiting, and then we'll hear from you at the back. Yeah.
I've been just to highlight the kind of fawning over the royal family that the BBC has. A couple of weeks ago, the biggest story on BBC News was about a barge crashing into a bridge. And that barge was the barge from the Royal Jubilee kind of flotilla thing. That was above Syria, above the NSA. But aside from that, for me, the monarchy is the most potent symbol of British imperialism and colonialism. And it just continues on to the extent that Prince Harry can go to Afghanistan and do an interview about killing enemy combatants, comparing it to like a game. That's that's the kind of potential future head of state.
No, it's not.
Come on, he's part of the royal family.
Well, he's never going to be head of state.
Yeah, it would take quite an elaborate series of circumstances, even more shocking than the baby mentioned by Joan Smith, for him to end up a scheme. Let's pass it back there. Young woman who was waiting on the corner there, you were quite patient. Yeah. Can we pass the microphone back 3 rows? Lady in a blue skirt, I think. There we are. Yeah.
I just wanted to say that it concerns me slightly that, Jenny, that you said that because somebody's in hello, that means that young people think that they're cool.
I said okay, actually.
Well,
well, no, I think that was just a small part of what I think is evidence from my experience of talking to young people. I've always thought that the biggest problem, the biggest threat to the monarchy was the apathy of young people. And I have noticed over the last 10 years that has changed because young girls in particular think Harry's great. William has caused enormous interest. I've been around the world following them. Young people love them, and they do identify them. We have 2 young men here who are somewhat different in their approach to life. You know, we see them actually going into supermarkets and doing the cooking and coming out on bicycles. And, just like us. That's right. So they're not set apart in the way that previous generations perhaps have been. And that's a good thing. That is part of what I'm saying about the monarchy, evolving, changing.
Now, the interesting thing is that whatever the mood in this room, the climate of opinion is very much with Jenny in the country. All the polls show that. There's staunch support for the royal family. So I'm quite keen to take a question or contribution from somebody who would put themselves broadly on that side of the argument. So the hands that are up, are you broadly in that position? Okay, I'm going to trust that you are. Off you go.
I don't know if I'm here because I didn't do this for the same reason that everybody else is, but the one thing about the monarchy for me is every time you say a soldier salute, a soldier is actually saluting the badge, and that badge represents the Queen. And I was very worried about living in a state that had a politician or had somebody that was elected in that place, and had an army that would respond to the elected will of the people. The thing about the Queen is, because if the Queen was to ever make a decision on that level, or any monarch on that level, it would cause a constitutional crisis so great that there would essentially be an election. The one example of this taking place was Juan Carlos in 1980, when essentially Spain looked like it was on the brink of another civil war. And Juan Carlos was able to call upon the Spanish army not to go against the wider will of the people for a bunch of renegades who had caused a mini coup. And that for me, it's a constitutional position, and I don't think people have kind of grasp that constitutional position enough.
Let's hear Joan Smith respond to that point. It is the idea that actually people have a loyalty to the crown, the monarchy, the monarch embodies that abstract institution, and that people do shudder when they imagine anybody almost elected in that position. And you remember Margaret Thatcher famously saying, "We are a grandmother." People didn't like the idea of her, an elected figure, taking kind of royal authority or royal charisma to herself. What do you think on that?
Well, she was pretty unpopular by then. I think whatever she'd said, people wouldn't have liked it. But I actually don't think most people think in these terms at all. I mean, I certainly don't have any affection for the crown. I have no relationship with it whatsoever. I think of myself as a citizen of a democratic country with the same rights as, you know, I'm very happy for the Queen to live in this country. She doesn't mean anything to me whatsoever. And I think, you know, you may be making a special case, but I doubt very much whether people as a you know, the general run of the public would even make that distinction. And I'm perfectly happy for the House of Commons is now supposed to vote before the country goes to war. And I really like that element of democracy in it.
Joan,
sorry, Joni, I just need to make one little announcement before we do, and you will carry on, I promise, is that I need to say that ballot boxes will now be going around for you to cast your vote. You've heard most of the key arguments here. I need you to either use one of these and either tear off a for, if you're for the motion that the royal baby should never be crowned, and against if you're against, and if you still haven't made up your mind, you want to abstain, well, you may have made up your mind and want to abstain, put the whole thing in the ballot box. And of course, for those of you watching on YouTube, the online vote is now live on the bottom right-hand side of your screen. I'm going to hear more of you who want to get in and also online, but Jenny Bond.
Well, it was just a small point, perhaps a rather frivolous one, but I just wondered, Joan, why, given that the Queen means absolutely nothing to you, you have no interest in the crown, why have you been to so many parties to meet her?
Because I pay for them.
Because you pay for them, therefore
yes,
you've got to go to the party.
I'm a taxpayer and I'm interested to see how my money is spent. And I'm interested in the institution because I don't think it works. And I certainly don't think the fact that I, as a citizen of this country, am forced to have this woman as my head of state when I don't want her and I don't have any say in it and I have to pay for it. I think that's a damn good reason for me going and seeing what they get up to.
And on the protocol point, honestly, she's very, very happy for you to speak first. I frequently do when I've met her, and in fact it's a relief to her because she doesn't have to make small talk with all these people who she doesn't know anyway.
Well, that isn't what happened to me. She was introduced, she was told who I was, I said hello, and she looked astounded and cut me dead.
Stephen Hayes, let's just hear you on this point. I think quite an important point made before about the military and their loyalty is to the crown rather than to an individual politician, and something important would change if we tinkered with that.
Well, that's a very difficult thing. I mean, giving oaths of loyalty to individual people as opposed to a constitution or a parliament is a very dangerous thing. And I don't think most people really understand the monarchy in that sense. I think the way they see the monarchy is as some kind of traditional setup, basically. And no, I don't think that military point. Another problem is all military officers, all members of Parliament, all members of the House of Lords, virtually every official in this country takes an oath of allegiance to an individual person. Much better to take an oath of allegiance to the Constitution.
Okay, we've got that. Thank you.
And to the people who they represent.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Stephen, because I think you've answered the point. The oath would no longer be to the crown, but it could be to a constitution rather than some other politician. Lots of hands up. I want to get in 2 or 3, and then we're going to bring it back. I think we'll hear from Rosie Boycott. Where is the microphone at the moment? It's hard for me to see right now. I think if we hear from the lady in the front row, because I don't know where the microphones are right now, but whoever's got the microphone near them in that cluster over there. Okay, well, it's down here. Okay, yeah.
Nuts. The figure you often quoted was 8,000 nurses, I think, you could pay for with the monarchy. How much does Republic spend? I was looking on their website, and the figures they quote for the monarchy were no real facts to back them up, to be honest. But how much Republic spent advertising? How many nurses could you pay for that? How can you justify criticising the monarchy if they're spending, if you spend money on trying to convince surely if your arguments are self-evident.
Okay,
well,
thank you. Joan, don't hold on, because I just want to get in some other people, and then we'll let you come back, absolutely. Microphone here, if we can bring that here. Lady here has been patiently waiting in the front row. Thank you very much. And we'll try and get one more in. Yeah.
Hello. I may be one of the few Yanks in the room, and I've heard some mention that this new head of state would be something akin to our president. Our president is one of the three legs of our government, the executive, the judicial, and the legislative. So I would think that if the Queen is going to be replaced with another head of state, that head of state would be much more potentially powerful. And how would that affect the existing form of government?
Okay, those are good questions, both of them for the Republican side of the argument. Hannah Black, our web host, has some online reaction. Let's hear from you.
Yeah, this is a question from Peter Knopfer and also some others online, saying maybe rather than abolishing the monarchy entirely, we could consider downsizing it. Perhaps we could get rid of Canada, for example, as I think one of the... Another question about the kind of clash between maybe the monarchy and perhaps ideas about meritocracy. Does it really send a message about a meritocratic society that we might want to live in?
Okay, let's go to you, Rosie Boycott, on that. That proposal of downsizing the monarchy, changing it, there was, I think, the suggestion that Canada be dropped, unless I misheard that. But I'm just wondering, because of your position was a sort of nuanced position, I'm just wondering if that is the kind of proposal that would appeal to you, not to abolish or just continue as we are, but to change it in some way.
Yeah, it does appeal to me because I think that there are a lot of problems, especially as that American lady just said. We would invest another elected official with a lot of power. I think inevitably the feeling that they were elected by the people for X years to be head of the state, unless they're a moron, how are they going to be non-political and non-interfering? But if you look at a country like Denmark, where my sister happens to live, so I go there a lot, they have what you would call an extremely modest monarchy, a very hard-working queen who also happens to write, who gets involved in interesting things there. They are not seen in Hello, or whatever the Danish equivalent is. They don't seem to cost very much money. They serve a purpose, and it seems that that purpose really does serve the state.
Okay.
Whereas I think that my reservations are sometimes the thought that the monarchy serves itself. And when you read stories about Charles having his toothpaste squeezed by a servant, you do really think, is this who we want? So I think the knockback is much more realistic and a much more realistic thing that we could get to.
Well, Prince Charles, in fact, is on record as saying he wants to slim down the monarchy. That is the direction it's going in. And the Queen made this very obvious herself at the Diamond Jubilee when all the focus was on the 7 main members of the family, the Duke, the Queen, Charles, Camilla, William, Catherine and Harry. Those are the only people who were on the balcony instead of all the rest of them. So there is this move to slim down the monarchy, and Charles is in the forefront of that, absolutely. And I think you're all being rather unfair to Prince Charles, actually. I personally think he's a deep-thinking, philosophical man who's been far ahead of his time for a number of years. Well, I've known him for a number of years, and he was very forward-thinking on a number of issues that are now mainstream.
He was a Green before it was fashionable to be a Green, for example. I'm going to bring in Hannah Black, because Hannah has an audience member there ready to contribute to this debate. Hannah Black.
Yes, Jessica's about to join us from Google Hangout, so we're just going to switch to her now. Hi, Jess.
Hello.
Hello.
Hi. Hilary Mantel said in her royal body speech that we're happy to allow monarchy to be entertainment. Does the panel think our desire for extensive media coverage of the royal baby will strain the relationship between the royal family and the public?
Okay, thank you very much, Jess, for that question. Very interesting. I'm going to put this to you, Joan Smith. I think you wrote quite a bit about this after it happened, about the whole Hilary Mantel business. I have a memory of you commenting in that debate. This idea, it puts a huge strain on the people involved, the monarchy process.
Well, I think there's a very easy to answer that. If they feel under strain, they can abdicate and become private citizens again, which is what I'd like to see happen. It just doesn't seem to me... It's kind of off the point in the sense that what I'm advocating is not that we have an executive president, it's that we have an elected head of state who isn't a rival to our prime minister or our government, but somebody who is more diverse and represents the kind of values of equality that I think this country stands for.
And Rosie Boycott, I'm just wondering what your view is of that the kind of media images, particularly around the women in the royal family. It does seem to be that the strain, if you accept there is some kind of strain, does seem to fall particularly on them. And you made this case about Diana a decade or so ago. What do you think on that?
I think the same, but again, a scaled-down monarchy would allow people to be more real. And yes, I mean, Hilary Mantel made a series of fantastic points, so that we were going to make their life impossible. And when I made that film by Diana, we made it as a fairy tale, and the fairy tale that went extremely wrong when she, effectively opened the door and found Bluebeard and got a head chopped off. And this was the pretty, I think we saw a very ugly side of what became known as the firm. And definitely it needs heavy reform, heavy slimming. And I think if they don't do it, there will be there is a good chance they will start to get the esteem the Queen's held in.
Thank you. I like the idea of heavy slimming. It feels like a spread in OK magazine already. Lady there has been keen to, and the man in front actually, both of you have been waiting a while. Is there a microphone we can get to you? We're just going to pass this along. We'll start with the lady and then pass it in front of you, if you can, to the man just waiting right there. So firstly from you, and then we'll bring it back and get final contributions from our speakers. Yes, please.
I think, to be quite frank, that you think it's too pink, that, you mention a lot of democracy, and we're very happy to have democracy. But I think it's you make it very pink how you think the voters will vote. For example, in Portugal, you had the royalty as well. You had a king for 800 years, a queen, and then it stopped. And obviously, then they had a dictator. So of course, now we all think, yeah, we should vote for a head of state, but. It sounds very pink. I think we should look a bit better in, indeed, how many voters are there, and
So risks attached to getting rid of this ancient system. And gentlemen in front.
I think when it comes to reforming the institutions of this country, it's a slightly odd priority to look at the royal family, who have limited executive power, when we have an unelected House with the Lords that has real, genuine power to make laws and is completely unelected. I think that should be the priority.
Okay, thank you. Let's get final responses to everything we've heard there. I'm just going to pick up on the House of Lords point and throw that to you, Stephen Hazler. This is the wrong focus. There are other democratic issues to raise.
Well, they're all tied up together. The House of Lords, the monarchy, the unelected Privy Council, all of these things in Britain, the established church, where the Queen is head of the church as well, and Charles, by the way, will become head of the church. So I think the answer to that point is that they're all tied up together.
Okay.
Can I just say a quick thing about Charles? Because this debate is about the future. It's about this royal baby and the future of the monarchy. And I think people should focus, could I suggest, when they're thinking about this issue, of Charles taking over when the Queen goes. He will take over as head of state of this country, representing you and me and everyone else, without anyone having asked him to do so. And I just wonder how he will feel about that.
Okay.
It might be rather better if he could take over after an election.
Thank you. These are closing remarks now. Jenny Bond, you've heard some of the arguments there. What about on that particular point about how the royal family themselves feel with these arguments swirling around, and the sense that raised there by Stephen Hazler, the worry that somebody like Charles, who in some ways has got more sort of modern thoughts about politics, might feel about being in this position without having ever had a single vote cast for him?
I feel quite sorry for the royal family sometimes, because they do take the most massive amount of criticism. The Queen is a very dedicated, religious, serious woman who believes profoundly in this institution and has devoted her life to it. She didn't want it. She certainly didn't want to become Queen when she was 25 and had 2 kids. But it was thrust upon her, and she's dedicated her life to it. Charles, I think, is given an extraordinarily bad press. You all seem to dislike him and mock him. As I've said, I think he has the potential to be a very fine king, and I should be perfectly happy for him to be king. And as we progress through William, this modern young man, I think it will be a slimmed down and looser organisation, more modern institution. I can see, as I say, at the beginning I said, I am unconvinced that it is the democratic will of the majority of the British people to unseat are sovereign, and I believe that to be the case.
Well, thank you for that, Jenny Bond. And speaking of democratic will, it is time for me to bring you the votes from this debate. So the final vote is now in. And before I tell you that result, let me remind you how you all voted before this debate began, before you heard the arguments. The pre-debate result for the motion that this royal baby should never be crowned, just to remind you, 55% of you agreed with that, 21 were against, and there were 24% who said they didn't know. Well, I can now reveal that after the debate, you've heard the arguments put, for the motion that this royal baby should never be crowned, the number has come down to 44%. Believe that. Those who are against the motion has risen dramatically from 21% to 49%. Just under half of you believe that, in fact, the royal baby should be crowned. And now the don't knows are down to 7%. So Rosie Boycott and Jenny Bond, your arguments have prevailed, and you've won the argument for tonight. The motion, therefore, that the royal baby should never be crowned has been defeated. It only remains for me to thank you all for being here this evening, whether in person or online. You can continue the debate online on the Google Plus Versus page. For now, I'd like to thank all of our speakers, Jenny Bond, Joan Smith, Stephen Hazler and Rosie Boycott, here and online, and to thank Intelligence Squared and Google for making all of this possible. From me, Jonathan Friedland, good night.